Jack Turner had spent his entire life in the wide-open fields of his family's farm, a legacy passed down through generations of hard-working men and women. Now, in his late 40s, Jack was not only a farmer, but also a staunch defender of his land's independence. Every morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, he would walk along the worn dirt paths between rows of corn and pastures, greeting his prized bulls with the respect they'd earned through years of toil and dedication. For Jack, his farm wasn't merely property. It was a sanctuary, a testament to freedom and self-reliance. Nestled on the outskirts of a small rural town, his farm was both a home and a statement. With a weathered farmhouse, a classic red barn, and acres of field stretching as far as the eye could see, Jack's domain was a place where nature and tradition merged seamlessly. The large iron-bound gate at the entrance, once a symbol of welcome, had been a point of pride and over the years, a trusted barrier to unwanted intrusions. That pride was about to be tested. Across town, Kerren Leland, self-styled as the guardian of neighborhood order and the president of the local homeowners association HOA, had long believed that every property should conform to her meticulously defined aesthetic. Known for her impeccably tailored suits, sharp tongue, and an air of entitlement, Kerren had made a career of policing the minutiae of her community. Her overreaching fines, baseless citations, and strict interpretations of proper property maintenance had left many residents feeling powerless. One sweltering afternoon, Jack returned from a long day in the fields only to find his heart pounding as he approached the farm's main gate. There, padlocked across the massive iron gate, was a new lock, one bearing the HOA emblem and a handwritten note. "This is for your own good. Prove you can follow the rules." Jack's blood ran cold. How dare Kerren encroach on his legacy by padlocking the very entrance to his home? The gate had always been his line of defense, a boundary that respected his right to privacy and independence. Now, it was a symbol of Kerren's intrusive overreach. Furious, Jack immediately marched to the small office of the HOA in town, his weathered boots pounding the pavement. That evening, as the sky deepened to twilight, he confronted Kerren outside her immaculate car. "Kerren, you padlocked my farm's gate without my permission," Jack said, voice low and determined. "My land is my legacy. I didn't ask for your intervention, and I won't stand for it." Kerren's eyes narrowed as she replied coolly, "Mr. Turner, the HOA has set community standards to preserve property values and aesthetics. Your failure to secure your property properly warranted corrective action. You should be grateful that I'm proving a point." The confrontation was tense, a clash between Jack's rugged individualism and Kerren's bureaucratic tyranny. Neighbors peered from behind windows and over hedges, murmuring in disbelief. For Jack, the padlocking of his gate was more than a petty act. It was a declaration that his personal freedoms were under siege. And deep in his heart, Jack vowed that he would not let this injustice pass unchallenged. That night, as Jack sat on the back porch watching the stars blink over his silenced land, he began planning his next move. The battle lines had been drawn. Kerren's overreach had provoked a challenge, and Jack Turner, steadfast and resolute, was ready to defend his legacy at any cost. The following morning, still seething from the padlock incident, Jack found another surprise waiting on his farmhouse door, a crisp, official envelope from the HOA. Opening it with grim determination, he read the notice: an additional fine of $750 for failure to comply with community security standards. According to the document, Jack was now being held responsible for not keeping his gate properly maintained and accessible to HOA inspectors, despite it being his private property. Before Jack could fully absorb the fine's implications, Kerren appeared on his porch. Dressed in her usual immaculate style and carrying a clipboard with an air of absolute certainty, she said, "Good morning, Mr. Turner. I see you received our notice. Our community standards are non-negotiable. Every homeowner must ensure their property complies, or we will take further action." Jack's jaw tightened as he replied, "Kerren, my farm is my private domain. I take pride in maintaining it, and your so-called standards have no bearing on my property. I'm within my rights to secure my gate as I see fit." Kerren's tone remained icy. "Mr. Turner, It's not about your personal preferences. It's about upholding the collective image of our community. I expect you to remove that padlock immediately and make your property accessible for routine inspections." Undeterred, Jack explained, "I've already spoken with local zoning officials. They confirmed that my private property is protected under the law. Your fine is nothing more than a power play." Kerren's eyes flashed with condescension as she responded, "If you disagree with our rules, Mr. Turner, you are welcome to contest them through proper channels. Meanwhile, I've arranged for inspectors to come later today. I suggest you comply to avoid further penalties." A wave of murmurs passed among the few curious neighbors who had gathered nearby. Jack knew that Kerren was pulling every string in her arsenal to make his life miserable. Later that morning, a van with the HOA's insignia pulled up to the farm. A small team of inspectors, armed with clipboards and stern expressions, began meticulously examining every inch of Jack's property. They measured the gate's placement, inspected the fence's condition, and even took notes on the surrounding landscape. Jack watched from a distance, capturing every moment on his phone. His determination was resolute. He would document this overreach and use it as evidence to fight back. As the inspectors left and Kerren departed in her sleek car with a curt nod, Jack sat on his front porch, the fine clutched in his hand. He knew that Kerren's actions were less about property standards and more about asserting control over every homeowner. That night, beneath a starry sky, Jack began drafting a detailed response, gathering phone call records, photos, and notes from his conversation with local officials to prepare for a legal battle against the HOA's arbitrary demands. Jack's resolve deepened as he realized that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was the first move in a campaign of intimidation orchestrated by Kerren Leland, a campaign he was now determined to expose. The fine, the inspection, and Kerren's smug demeanor had all become symbols of a larger struggle for personal freedom and the right to manage one's own property without interference. In the days that followed the initial fine and intrusive inspection, Kerren's tactics began to escalate with a relentless fury. More violation notices started appearing not only on Jack's door, but on those of neighboring farmers as well, each citing obscure infractions such as improper gate alignment and inadequate accessibility for community oversight. It quickly became clear that Kerren was using the HOA's authority to exert control over everyone in the area, not just those who had deliberately defied her. Jack soon discovered unsettling patterns in the HOA's records. Late one night, he pored over old meeting minutes and financial ledgers in his farmhouse office. What he uncovered shocked him. Kerren and several board members had been imposing arbitrary fines and funneling the proceeds into a community fund that lacked any transparency. Rumors circulated among his neighbors that these fines were less about maintaining standards and more about lining the pockets of the HOA's elite. During a visit to the local feed store, a fellow farmer confided in Jack, "I've heard that Kerren's been using these fines to pay for lavish parties and even personal expenses. It's all a ploy to keep us in line." Jack's anger simmered as he realized that the battle was not merely about a padlock gate. It was about systemic abuse of power. Determined to expose this corruption, Jack reconfigured his security cameras to capture every interaction with the HOA enforcers. He began documenting each violation notice, every inspection, and even recorded private conversations with a couple of board members who hesitantly admitted that some of the fines were fabricated. Every piece of evidence was meticulously stored, forming a growing dossier that painted a damning picture of Kerren's regime. At the next HOA meeting, held in a drab community center with flickering fluorescent lights, Jack took a stand. Clutching his thick folder of documents and video footage, he addressed the tense crowd of homeowners and board members. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonant with quiet fury, "what we are witnessing is not about upholding some abstract notion of order. It's about bullying us into submission and extracting money under the guise of community standards. My property, my livelihood, and my freedom have all been trampled by arbitrary rules and unchecked authority." A murmur of discontent spread through the room as Jack laid out his evidence. Copies of violation notices, video clips of the intrusive inspections, and excerpts from internal communications that hinted at financial improprieties. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few brave homeowners nodded their support. But Kerren, standing at the front, dismissed his claims with a curt, "Mr. Turner, your evidence is nothing more than isolated incidents. Our rules are clear, and if you disagree, you should follow proper appeal procedures." Jack's eyes burned with resolve as he retorted, "I have followed every procedure, spoken with local officials, and received confirmation that my property is protected. Yet you continue to impose these fines and violations arbitrarily. This is not about aesthetics, it's about control and exploitation." The tension in the room was palpable, and whispers of rebellion began to echo among the assembled homeowners. It was clear that Kerren's grip on power was beginning to loosen, as the community started to see the HOA for what it truly was, a tool of intimidation. That night, as Jack compiled his dossier and planned his next steps, he knew that the fight was only just beginning. The seeds of resistance had been sown, and he was determined to expose every facet of the corruption that had long festered within the HOA. The situation reached a boiling point one scorching afternoon when Kerren decided to push her campaign of control to an extreme. Claiming that Jack's failure to properly secure his property was a public safety hazard, she ordered that the farm gate be padlocked, a move intended to force him into compliance and serve as a stark example to all other homeowners. When Jack arrived at his gate later that day, his blood ran cold. There, padlocked tight, was the entrance to his farm, the very threshold that had guarded his family's legacy for decades. The padlock was emblazoned with the HOA's insignia and a handwritten note, "For the good of the community. Prove you can follow the rules." Fury and disbelief surged through Jack. How dare Kerren intrude so brazenly into his private property? With the gate padlocked, not only was his access to the farm restricted, but the symbol of his independence was under attack. That very evening, Jack knew he had to act decisively. With determination fueled by years of defending his land, he devised a plan that would turn Kerren's tactic against her. Drawing on his deep knowledge of the farm and its livestock, Jack decided to lock Kerren inside the very space she had sought to control, using his prize bulls as a final, unforgettable statement. Under cover of dusk, Jack gathered his most imposing bulls, animals known not only for their strength but for their territorial instincts, and arranged for them to be herded toward the gate. With the padlock in place and the gate sealed, the plan was simple yet audacious. When Kerren next attempted to inspect the property or demand access, she would find herself trapped on the farm, surrounded by bulls whose unpredictable nature would serve as a living reminder of the consequences of overreach. The next morning, Kerren arrived in her sleek SUV, determined to enforce compliance. As she approached the padlocked gate with a small entourage of HOA enforcers, the bulls were already in position, calmly but resolutely grazing near the barrier. When Kerren tried to force her way in, one of the bulls broke away from the group and snorted loudly, stamping its hooves, a clear signal of territorial warning. Kerren's face paled as the bulls began to encircle her vehicle. Her confident stride faltered, and soon, panic replaced her usual smug demeanor. Enforcers hesitated, unsure how to handle the situation, while Kerren frantically attempted to unlock the gate. Hidden cameras captured every moment. Her rising panic, her desperate attempts to call for backup, and the increasingly agitated bulls that now symbolized a power no HOA rule could tame. Within minutes, what had begun as an attempted enforcement turned into a public spectacle. Neighbors, who had long grown tired of Kerren's authoritarian tactics, gathered at a safe distance, smartphones in hand, recording the surreal scene. The bulls, majestic and untamed, roamed the vicinity as Kerren's entourage scrambled to restore order. At the subsequent HOA meeting, Jack presented the security footage, the vivid images of Kerren trapped and visibly rattled by the bulls, alongside his dossier of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections. The evidence spoke volumes. Kerren's attempt to impose her will had backfired spectacularly, and the community's patience had reached its limit. Kerren's response during the meeting was weak and defensive. "These are isolated incidents," she insisted, but the room was filled with murmurs of agreement and pointed questions. The balance of power was shifting. The community now saw that when one man's right to protect his legacy was under attack, it was a battle for everyone's freedom. Jack's counterstrike had not only reclaimed his farm's entrance, but had also sparked a turning tide. The act of locking Kerren inside with his bulls became a potent symbol, a declaration that no one, not even the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, could trample on the hard-won rights of a proud, independent farmer. As Kerren's humiliation became public and her authority wavered, she resorted to a final, desperate maneuver in an attempt to salvage control. Early one chilly morning, Kerren appeared at Jack's farm with renewed determination, flanked by a couple of HOA enforcers and clutching a thick folder of legal notices. With a stern expression and a forced air of command, she demanded an emergency meeting on the spot. "Mr. Turner," she barked as she confronted him near the now famous Padlocked gate, "your noncompliance leaves me no choice. I am here to remove these obstacles and restore order to our community. You must unlock your gate immediately and comply with HOA regulations." Jack, calm and resolute, met her glare. "Kerren, I have every right to secure my property. Your tactics are nothing but intimidation. I have documented every move you've made, from the arbitrary fines to the padlocking of my gate. Today, you'll have to answer for your actions." Undeterred, Kerren ordered her enforcers to force open the gate. As they fumbled with heavy tools and attempted to break the lock, Jack's hidden cameras captured every moment. Then, in a move that would etch itself into local lore, one of the bulls charged forward, not to attack Kerren directly, but to scatter her enforcers and force a retreat. The chaos was instantaneous. Kerren's voice rose in a mix of fury and desperation as she tried to regain control, shouting orders and legal jargon at the top of her lungs. "This is a public disturbance. I'm calling the police right now," she declared. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance, and uniformed officers arrived on the scene. Jack calmly presented the security footage to the arriving police, clearly showing Kerren's reckless behavior and the ensuing pandemonium. The footage left little doubt. Kerren had not only violated property rights, but had also incited chaos through her arbitrary enforcement measures. As the officers began taking statements from the flustered enforcers and distraught neighbors, Kerren's final, desperate move unraveled completely. Caught on camera, her attempted seizure of control looked more like a power grab than a justified action. "This isn't over," she shrieked as she was ushered away by the police, her voice trailing off into the commotion. For Jack, the moment was bittersweet, a vindication of his right to defend his property, yet a stark reminder of the lengths to which tyrants will go when they begin to lose control. The incident became the definitive turning point in the community's battle against the overreaching HOA, and every bit of footage and evidence would soon become the cornerstone of a larger legal and public challenge. In the wake of the chaotic raid and Kerren's failed attempt to seize control, the community's outrage reached its zenith. Homeowners, emboldened by Jack's steadfast resistance and the damning evidence he had compiled, convened an emergency town hall meeting at the local community center. The room was filled with impassioned residents who shared stories of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and the persistent bullying of Kerren Leland. At the meeting, Jack took the stage once again, his thick folder of evidence in hand. He presented the security footage of the padlock gate, the bull-induced chaos, and Kerren's desperate outbursts, laying bare the corruption and overreach of the HOA under her leadership. The room fell silent as neighbors absorbed the undeniable truth. Kerren's reign of tyranny had cost them not only money, but their peace and freedom. A vote was called, and with overwhelming unanimity, the homeowners decided that Kerren must be expelled from the HOA board. The decision sent shockwaves through the community and was swiftly reported by local media under headlines like "Tyrant Toppled," "Kerren's Fall from Grace." Within days, the remaining board members, now exposed to the public's wrath, resigned en masse. An independent audit was launched to recover misappropriated funds and to implement a new, transparent management system that prioritized residents' rights over arbitrary rules. For Jack, the expulsion was a profound victory, a validation that his fight for personal freedom had not been in vain. At a celebratory gathering on his farm, Neighbors toasted with homemade lemonade and shared heartfelt stories of their struggles under Kerren's regime. The oppressive shadow of the HOA had begun to lift, replaced by a collective spirit of autonomy and community solidarity. As the sun set over the fields, Jack sat on his porch, sipping coffee and watching his farm breathe a newfound freedom. His actions had sparked a revolution, a turning point where the voice of a single, determined farmer had brought down an entire system of abuse and corruption. In the aftermath of Kerren's expulsion and the public outcry, legal action against the HOA became inevitable. A class action lawsuit was promptly filed on behalf of the community, alleging gross mismanagement, fraudulent fines, and systemic abuse of power under Kerren's leadership. Jack's extensive dossier, comprising security footage, violation notices, witness testimonies, and internal documents, formed the cornerstone of the case. During a tense courtroom session, one by one, homeowners took the stand, recounting their personal ordeals and the arbitrary penalties they'd suffered. The evidence painted an irrefutable picture of an HOA that had exploited its authority for personal gain rather than community benefit. The presiding judge, after reviewing the compelling evidence, declared, "The court finds that the actions of the HOA, particularly under the direction of Kerren Leland, have flagrantly violated the rights of its members. The HOA is hereby fined, and immediate reforms must be implemented." Local authorities pledged tighter oversight on community associations to prevent future abuses. The legal verdict was celebrated across the county, marking a decisive victory for property rights and individual freedom. For Jack, it was a moment of deep vindication, proof that his steadfast refusal to yield had not only saved his farm, but had also dismantled a corrupt system that had long oppressed his community. As the legal and public judgments against the HOA solidified, Kerren Leland's personal world crumbled. Once a figure of unassailable authority, she became the subject of harsh criticism and public ridicule. Footage of her desperate attempts to padlock Jack's gate and her panicked efforts during the bull incident circulated widely on social media, spawning memes and scathing commentary. Her luxurious lifestyle, once marked by designer clothes, expensive cars, and an air of untouchability, began to unravel. Creditors knocked on her door, foreclosure notices arrived, and former allies distanced themselves as her reputation disintegrated. In a final humiliating twist, Kerren was forced to accept a low-ranking position as an assistant property manager for a small, struggling HOA in a neighboring town, a role that stripped her of any semblance of authority. One crisp morning, while Jack was checking on his fields, he spotted Kerren leaving her new, unremarkable office building. Exchanging a knowing glance with a neighbor, Jack couldn't help but murmur with quiet satisfaction, "I hope you enjoy following orders, Kerren." Her fall from grace became a cautionary tale throughout the community, a living reminder that unchecked power inevitably invites accountability. Kerren's once dominant persona was now reduced to bitter irony, and the community relished every moment of her undoing. In the months that followed, the oppressive reign of Kerren Leland became nothing more than a dark chapter in the community's history. Jack Turner's farm, once under siege by arbitrary fines and intrusive tactics, had been fully reclaimed as a bastion of freedom and self-reliance. The padlocked gate had been removed, and the memory of that unjust act was replaced by the triumphant tale of resistance, a tale symbolized by the legendary incident where Kerren was locked inside with Jack's bulls. At a festive neighborhood barbecue held on the farm's sprawling lawn, residents gathered to celebrate their newfound autonomy. Laughter filled the air as neighbors recounted their shared struggles and the remarkable chain of events that had toppled an overbearing regime. In a final act of playful defiance, one neighbor produced a humorous violation notice for excessive bull-induced mayhem and handed it to Jack with a wink. Raising the faux citation high, Jack grinned and declared they really tried. But in the end, nothing can lock down the spirit of a community that stands together for its rights. His words, echoing over the warm summer night, were met with cheers and applause. As twilight settled over the farm, Jack sat on his porch, gazing out at the land that had survived tyranny and emerged stronger. The stars shone bright above, and in that peaceful moment it was abundantly clear. While tyrants may rise and fall, the indomitable spirit of community and the right to live free will always prevail. Fade to black.